Well, this is where one of the first pictures I've ever shown in a presentation came from. This is the location where back in the 1910s, a gentleman by the name of Carnes operated a convenience store. Mr. Carnes had an employee for a short period of time who was my great-grandfather, G.W. Brown. And in this store, the idea was that customers would come up and they sold convenience products and they sold grocery products to the customers. But my great-grandfather, during his employment, pointed out to Carnes that this highway, which is standing straight behind where the photographer is, that highway going from Fort Smith to Van Buren, Arkansas, would be a good way to take and get people's attention. That if they would offer gasoline, since cars looked like they were going to hang on, that this would be a way to get people to stop. Someone would come out of the store, service the car, and then while they were having their car serviced, the occupants of the car would go into the store and shop. And Mr. Carnes didn't like the idea. So in secret, my great-grandfather bought the piece of property that's across the street and decided to open up his own business. Here in just a moment, I'll show you that piece. Well, this is the location where the family actually started. It was in 1922 that my great-grandfather, G.W. Brown, had in secret bought this very piece of land. And while as we look at today, it's just not a whole lot to look at. This is where the family business was. Actually, right here behind is a place of a post, and that's where the post actually began for the family business. And when my great-grandfather started, it was groceries, convenience, and gasoline. On this very location, starting in 1922, it was built as a two-story building, which the store occupied the first level, the gas pumps out front, and the top level was the residence. The residence was actually used by my great-grandparents and my grandparents until about 1955-56, somewhere in that neck of the woods, when they moved to the other side of town. Slowly but surely, this location grew to add buildings to both sides, both to the north and to the south. Slowly but surely things were added, and it also then began to expand to the west. All of this became part of the family business, which was Buster Brown's, my grandfather. My great-grandparents had 5 sons. Let's see, there was Orby, Liesel, Kenneth, Buster, and Van, the youngest of the 5. All of them at one time or another worked in the business. But it was Buster who wound up with the family business in this location. And in a moment I'll show you just a little bit more about what happened here. Arkansas, the far western edge, we are right now only 6 blocks away from being in the state of Oklahoma. This particular area is part of Tornado Alley. Storms are prevalent here. Why, just as we have filmed this today, we had some very severe storms here just the last evening that did sizable amount of damage. But it was in the spring of about 1965, it was April as I remember it, and it was about a Thursday night as I remember best, that a storm came through. There was a customer who was just up the road here. It's called Division Street. It says that he was stopped and saw the lightning that hit the store. And with the exception of the original house and the original store underneath, everything burnt. When I say everything, by this point in time we had grown to where the family business actually occupied the entire city block. This was from P Street down here to Division, from 6th Street just behind the photographer over to 5th Street. Everything in the block was part of Buster Brown's general store. It burned down with the exception of it, and I can remember that being here that weekend that my grandfather managed to stay in business, selling and what little items that were stored in this building, as well as my grandfather had this habit of buying tremendous amounts of merchandise, he actually rented several old houses in the neighborhood and stored merchandise there. So he was able to take the old house and the old store and be in business the very next day after the fire. And at that point, they demolished what little was left of the place and came back and built another store that was located on the very southern edge of the property. That building today is still standing. As I had mentioned, my great-grandparents, G.W. and Bessie Brown, had 5 sons. Of the 5 sons, 2 of them wound up over the long run having their own store. There's an old saying of there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and maybe it was too many Browns in the store to have the great-grandparents and the 5 sons did, all 7 of them. But my Uncle Liesel went to work for one of the banks, and it's the case with many people who eventually wind up in retailing, came to the realization that if he wanted to make money, he had to go to work for himself. So over here on 9th Street between Garrison and Rogers, my great-uncle Liesel came and opened up the first of his stores. His first store was called Interstate General. The neat part was that Interstate General grew, business grew bigger and bigger, and great-uncle Liesel moved his business several blocks away. We'll go look at that place now. This is the corner of Rogers Avenue and 7th Street in Fort Smith. This is the last location of Interstate General. It was a large 2-story building that faced against Rogers, and as I can remember it, down the side, on the very far end, my Uncle Liesel had a meat market, sold poultry and pork and various things like that. And as you came in the store, there was an elevator and a set of steps midway through the building that went up to the 2nd floor of the store. He carried many of the same things that my grandfather carried in his store, although I would say, in my recollections, this store was a little more upscale than was my grandfather's, but not as upscale as the 2 stores that were on the north side of Rogers, which was the Boston store and which was Hunt's department store, both of which stores who have long disappeared from the road map of Fort Smith, Arkansas. Well, the question that is always asked deals with my grandfather. Is he really Buster Brown? Well, my grandfather was born in Oklahoma in 1906, long before Oklahoma became a state. It was still a territory. So at that point, birth certificates did not exist. So in looking to have the evidence, so to speak, I brought you out here to the cemetery along the banks of the Arkansas River where my grandfather is buried, and sure enough, you see right here, it does say Buster Brown. Now, the truth of the story is, was Buster Brown his name? No, my grandfather's real name was Roy Mildred Brown. And yes, the brand of shoes were already in existence, Buster Brown shoes. And Buster simply became his nickname. Or as I might see it, can you imagine a young boy running around with his friends and being called Mildred? Nah, I don't think so. But the name Buster Brown is associated with my grandfather, and he is known in this town as being the Buster Brown. We're standing here in Fort Smith, Arkansas at the corner of 13th Street and Garrison Avenue. Behind me, many years ago, stood the Goldman Hotel, somewhat of a famous landmark here in this area. Well, the significance to the Goldman is not that my family had anything to do with the hotel business, but somewhere around the turn of the century, there was a gentleman by the name of W.H. Ray, also known as Major Ray, or in the advertisement known as Buster Brown. Yes, he was the model that everyone knows in the Buster Brown shoe commercials. And it was during a promotional tour that Buster Brown, W.H. Major Ray, stayed here at the Goldman Hotel. The oddity, or perhaps the significance of his stay here in Fort Smith, is for those who may have seen these commercials. The character says, "Hi, my name is Buster. I live in a shoe. Here's my dog Tigey. You'll like him too." Tigey was with him, and during his stay here in Fort Smith, the dog Tigey passed away. Well, in just a second, I'm going to take you to another part of town and show you where Tigey was buried. This is it, somewhere here about where I'm standing, because at the turn of the century or so, this was a residence, and the dog was buried somewhere in the front yard, except today, what this area is a part of Sparks Hospital. So either Tigey is buried deep down underneath something somewhere, or long ago the bones and remains of Tigey have been dug up, and who knows where they are, because they rested here for what is surely over 100 years. But that's the relationship that my grandfather, Buster Brown, had with that Buster Brown, W.H. Major Ray.